Virtue is not at all prevailing over acquired inclinations in specific cases, but rather trying to get rid of such inclinations. That is, learning to enjoy abstaining. It therefore doesn't consist of being in conflict with natural inclinations, but making sure that one doesn't have any but natural inclinations, for then one can always satisfy them. Immanuel Kant. Already in my previous lectures, I've been talking about what Kant has to say about the good life, about happiness. And I said that in general, Kant advises independence. The more dependent we are, the more unhappy we are. The more independent we are, the more we depend only on ourselves, the more we have, mastery over our own happiness. Now, so far I talked mainly about independence from your own mind or from your own psyche. I said that according to Kant, we should not allow ourselves affections or passions. Rather, we should strive for a certain equanimity, for a certain calmness, for a certain tranquility of soul, for a mood that always stays the same. We should, I said in my last lecture on Kant's Stoicism, we should take things to heart. That is, we should not be indifferent. We should allow things to move us into action, but we should not let things affect our mood. We should not be overly sensitive. But there's also another side to this. Not only should we be independent from ourselves and from our own psyche in order to lead a happy life, we should also be independent from the world and the things, the goods of the world. And that, of course, also is connected to the former and also means being independent from ourselves, because why would we depend on the world? Only because of our desires, only because of our inclinations and our needs. If we don't need something, then we don't depend on it. If, however, we do need something, then we depend on that object for our happiness. And the basic point to make here is that people are happy if they have what they need. Whatever it may be that they need, but if they do have what they need, then they are happy. And on the other hand, if they don't have what they need, then they are unhappy. I think in this basic form, anyone can agree with this statement, or hardly anyone would disagree that you are unhappy if you don't have what you need and that you are happy if you have what you need. But the question is, what conclusion do we draw from this general insight? There are two very different conclusions to be drawn, a positive and a negative one. Most people unthinkingly, mindlessly, subscribe to a positive theory of happiness. In order to be happy, you need to attain certain things. Namely, you need to attain what you need. Most people would say, okay, since I would be unhappy if I didn't have what I need, what I have to do is get whatever I need. So people seek their happiness from objects, from attaining objects. Now, they might, of course, differ on what kind of objects they are seeking. One person will say, okay, I want a relationship or I want a family. The next person wants to take some drugs. Another person wants to go on parties or whatever, or go on vacation, all kinds of people might be looking for money, for financial security, for money that can buy them whatever objects they desire. But they would be in general agreement that in order to find happiness in life, they need to hunt after certain objects. Because again, if you don't have the objects you need, you're unhappy. So if you want to be happy, better get the objects you need. It seems logical. But Kant would disagree that this is the path to happiness. And Kant is, of course, not alone in this. All sages would disagree with this, right? Over 2000 years ago, you already have Buddha pointing out that no, in fact, if we seek happiness, if we seek pleasure in that way, and make ourselves dependent on the world and on the goods of the world, then in fact it will only bring us unhappiness. It will only bring us misery. But Buddha was not alone in this. Nowadays, such a teaching might be more associated with the East, but the West also recognized this. Whether you turn to the ancient Epicureans or to the Cynics or the Stoics, and of course, Kant knew the teachings of the ancients and had read ancient authors, especially the ancient Romans. So, of course, he was influenced by those. They all would have talked, try to live a more frugal or more minimalistic lifestyle. Don't try to hunt after all kinds of goods, all kinds of luxury. Those things might give you some pleasure, sure, but with a lifestyle like this, you cannot have constant pleasure. There will always be times of displeasure, of pain, because probably you're not getting whatever you want. Because if you live as a victim, and I want to point out, this is always important to me because all I do is about Aufklärung, and Aufklärung means living with the posture of a perpetrator, with someone who's active, who's responsible, who has his own life in his own hand, while the unaufkläred people, they always want to live as victims, so as passive, as dependent. And the thing is, if you live as a perpetrator, you're master of your own fate. You're not dependent on whatever happens or doesn't happen to you on the outside. But if you live as a victim, then sure, you can sometimes maybe live as a victim in a positive way. That is, good feelings, pleasurable feelings can be brought onto you by the outside world. But if you depend on the outside world, then you will be a victim no matter what. You will be a victim when the world offers you good feelings, but also you will be a victim, you will be passive when the world offers you bad feelings. If you depend on any object for your happiness, that can cause you certain pleasure, but it will always also a possible cause for displeasure. If, for example, in order to be happy, you need to have a big fancy car, then what happens if you lose that car? What happens if, because you broke the traffic laws, you lose your driver's license and you're not allowed to use the car anymore? Or what happens if you, for some reason, can't drive the car anymore? If maybe in the future it becomes too expensive because of the climate, because of shortages, because of wars, so that we don't have any gas anymore. If it is the car that brings you happiness, then the car also can bring you unhappiness. If, on the other hand, your happiness does not depend on the car, then neither does your unhappiness. Then losing the car cannot make you unhappy. There's many possible issues with your happiness depending on the fulfillment of the satisfaction of all kinds of desires you might have. Issues that, once again, not just Kant has talked about, but many other sages, many other thinkers before him. So, for example, often the means of satisfying a desire are not in your hand. So, if your happiness depends on, let's say, living in a big mansion or driving a big car, but you don't have the money for that, then you're doomed to be unhappy. Also, even if you do have the means of satisfying your needs, the means might not always be reliable. This particularly is the case if satisfying our needs depends on other people, right? So if you need to have sex in order to be happy, well, you might get to have sex, but it doesn't depend only on you. It also depends on the other person, and the other person, even if they want to have sex with you now, they might not want to have sex with you forever. So you are here depending on a means to attain what you want, which maybe is not unattainable completely, but which is also not completely under your control. Which, by the way, is precisely the reason Kant says that passions develop always when it comes to other people. I talked about this more in my lecture on the affections and passions. Kant says passions, especially strong and overwhelming desires, concern our fellow human beings always, because these, since they have free will, are the most unreliable. So the passionate person wants to somehow control them, to somehow get from others whatever he wants. A second issue is that some of your desires might be unfulfillable altogether. Not only do you not have the means to fulfill them, or maybe you have the means for now, but they are not reliable, but rather you cannot possibly have the means. There are no means. If you desire to bring back a lost loved one, or to turn back time altogether, to change past choices you made, if you desire, let's say, to explore space and go to distant stars, if this is a true need, if you need this for your happiness, again, you're doomed to be unhappy. Then there's also the fact that sometimes you may be able to actually satisfy a desire, but it never stays satisfied, right? There's not the one desire we can satisfy, and then we just stay happy for the rest of our lives, but rather, out of the satisfaction of one desire, new desire soon arises. This could be the very same desire, right? So, for example, the desire for food, no matter how you satisfy it, even if you eat the best food in the world, you will inevitably be hungry again sooner or later. Or if you have the desire for sex, even if you do have the best sex in the world, it will probably not satisfy you for the rest of your life. You will probably be horny again sooner or later. But also, not only will the same desire probably come back, there's also a big chance that other desires will arise. Every desire, every need that is satisfied, Kant would say, births 10 new ones. So there's never an end to desiring. If you are hunting after whatever you desire, you condemn yourself to run forever in some endless hamster wheel. And also, what is a very important point to Kant is that he says satisfying our desires dulls us to them. So, even if you get what you want, and even if you get it again and again and again, you will probably stop wanting it. You will probably stop finding the same satisfaction from it, right? I mean, most people would not want to eat the same thing over and over again, even if it's their favorite dish. After a time, they would be fed up with it, literally. Or most people would not want to always watch their favorite movie or read their favorite book again. We need some change. We need some diversity. And Kant says that over time, when we seek out the same kind of pleasure, the same kind of satisfaction, we become more and more numb to it, which often leads us to seeking more extreme sorts of satisfaction. Right? This is a well-known phenomenon. So you can see that, for example, in people who are addicted to drugs, they cannot just take the same drug in the same dose again and again, which would probably be bad enough, but rather after a time it will not be as it was at the start anymore. So they are seeking out a higher dose till they overdose, or they are seeking out more intense, more extreme drugs. The same you can find in people who are addicted to pornography or to certain kinds of sexual acts. They also tend to, after a time, get bored with it and seek for more and more extreme sexual practices, more and more extreme fetishes, things they weren't even necessarily into in the first place. So it's not like an original part of their sexuality. It's just that over time they get used to the same stuff, and so they seek out new things, new excitements, and they seek out more extreme stuff. And this is precisely why Kant advises against having such needs, because every need that you have is like a shackle that ties you down, is something that makes you dependent, is something that makes you less free, and therefore less of a human being, since humanity is defined by our autonomy. Us being autonomous as rational beings is literally the only thing that separates us from the animals that are slaves to their instincts, to their desires. This brings me back to the original statement. Again, a person is unhappy if he lacks what he needs. So, in order to be happy, you should attain a state where you have what you need, where there isn't much left that you need and that you don't have. I said there are two ways towards this. One would be the positive way, getting whatever you need. But what Kant suggests, and what philosophers have suggested since antiquity, is a negative way towards happiness. Simply not needing much. Because, you have whatever you need if you get all the things you need. but you also have whatever you need without getting any things if you simply don't need anything, right? Um, so for that reason, Kant, for example, has a twofold concept of being rich, of wealth. He says there is positive wealth and there's negative wealth. Positive wealth is what we would usually call someone being rich. So um, if you have lots of money, if you can buy anything you might want, then you're rich in the positive sense. But if maybe you don't have lots of money, but you also don't want to buy lots, meaning you don't need lots of money, then you're rich in the negative sense, right? Because you can buy anything you want. Not because you have so much money, but because there isn't much that you want, right? Which is basically the attitude that my dad always had when I was growing up with him, saying, if by the end of the month I bought everything I wanted in that month and I still have 1 cent left, then I'm rich. Because it doesn't really matter whether I have 1 cent left or whether I have 1 billion left after I bought everything I want. I don't want more than I want. So it doesn't matter how much more I could buy if I would not buy more. And this negative path to happiness, this is precisely what Kant would advise us to do. In order to be happy, you don't need to have all kinds of things. You simply need to be content with that what you have. It's not even necessary not to desire more. You can desire more because not every desire is a need. So it would be wrong to assume that an unfulfilled desire necessarily makes us unhappy. That entirely depends on the degree of the desire. Sure, if you desire food and you're very hungry and your stomach is hurting and you cannot fulfill that, you're starving, you will probably not be happy. But there can be other desires that might be things that you would like to have, but you can also very well do without, right? Everyone probably has some nice to haves. Like in my case, for example, I dedicated my life to the study of philosophy of the Western tradition, and I will never be done with that. My life will be too short for that. No matter how long I live, even if I grow very old, I will not have enough time to read all the great works, even just from the Western tradition. Now, in theory, in the abstract sense, I would like to someday learn Sanskrit, learn Chinese, and study the Indian or the Chinese tradition. But I know that this will probably never happen. That I will not have the time for that. I made my choice to focus on one specific part of human thinking, and I'm fine with that. I can live with that choice. I don't feel bad or like I'm lacking something because I will never read those other things. And just like that, you can tell yourself, oh, it would maybe be nice to go to that place someday, to have a vacation there, to see this or that famous site. But if it never happens, my life will not really be worse. I will not really be unhappy because of that. So not every desire is a need. A need, as the name says, is something that you need to be fulfilled, otherwise you will be unhappy. Um, but you can have a lot of unfulfilled desires even and still be very happy, still be very satisfied, simply because these desires are needs, simply because they are things you can do without. Kant here likes to say with the Stoics, abstain from what you can abstain from and bear what you can bear. Which, of course, is today a very untimely advice. It's pretty much the exact opposite of what our time preaches. Because our time, of course, preaches stuff yourself as much as you can and always increase and multiply your desires and your needs. And if you have to bear, then complain and whine about it and be resentful and full of self-pity and seek others that are guilty and that you can blame for it. Kant is not against fulfilling desires, as I already said. And he's not against seeking pleasure in life. It's just that to him there are different kinds of pleasures. Of course, some desires are actual needs, like the desire for food. But then, when it comes to desiring things that we don't need, those Kant calls pleasantries, right? So something can be pleasant, it can be nice to have it, but I don't need it. I can still be happy if I live without it. If, however, this thing, this fulfillment of a desire that I don't actually need, becomes something that I do need, if I say I cannot do without it, then this is not anymore a pleasantness, rather this is wantonness. Wanton to Kant means desiring something, not just desiring it, but needing it, strongly desiring it, that is not actually necessary. And being without wantonness, not needing these pleasant things in life, maybe enjoying them, maybe appreciating them, but not needing them, that is what Kant calls modesty or frugality. And this modesty is precisely the posture we should strive for. Modest is he who does not require luxury, who does not require anything that is not absolutely needed. But Kant says there are two types of modesty. There's the naive modesty, and then there's the wise modesty. The difference between them is the reason why you are modest. The naive modesty is when you don't need luxury because you don't know it. You are content with little because you have never known much. This naive modesty can be found in the children. Nowadays, I would emphasize in very small children, because very soon it gets destroyed nowadays by the parents, by those who raise the children, by our society. Children very soon get fed with all kinds of unnatural and unnecessary desires. But if you let the child grow up normally and naturally, the child doesn't need much to be happy, right? The child doesn't need a new smartphone to be happy or fancy clothes from some brand. The child doesn't need all kinds of fancy toys or whatever. For hundreds and thousands of years, children have lived without those and still had fun. If you let a child grow up with modesty, the child will be content to just be outside, run around, climb a tree, play hide and seek, or maybe play with some things that finds in nature, with some sticks and stones, crafting something, drawing in the mud or whatever. Doesn't need all kinds of fancy toys. And just like the children, the savages, or the common people, so the peasants in his time, Kant says, they have this naive modesty. The problem with the naive modesty is, since it is not built on conscious principles, on rational insight, since it is not true character, but rather these people just don't know any better, it can easily be lost once those people are familiarized with luxury. So they can easily be seduced, and they can become wanton. Which is precisely why you should not be content with someone just having the naive modesty, but rather you should strive for the wise modesty. The wise modesty means you're modest not because you don't know that there is luxury, you don't know that there are many pleasant things that could be enjoyed. Rather, you do know them, maybe you have even tasted them, but you consciously decided that you don't need this. You consciously decided that you want to be modest. I already gave a whole lecture about what is wisdom to Kant, where I explained that wise, according to Kant, is he who does not foolishly get lost in things that don't matter, or does not foolishly treat a mere means to some other purpose as if it was the highest purpose in life, but rather the wise person is he who focuses on what truly is the highest purpose, which of course is our moral duty, is our true task here in this world. And so this wisdom will necessarily make you modest. If you are wise, if you are focused on your true purpose as a human being, you will realize that all the pleasant things in life, all this luxury, might be nice, might be something you can enjoy once in a while, but it is not necessary to be happy. The opposite of modesty could be called opulence, right? So the modest person is content with little. He may enjoy more from time to time if there is a chance for it, if there's an opportunity. He may appreciate the pleasant things, but he doesn't need them. On the other hand, the opulent person, to him, those not needed things are not merely pleasant, but rather to him there's wantonness. He needs those things. And I will point out that this opulence, or you could also say luxury, the word used in German is Üppigkeit, that this is basically the deadly sin of lust, right? In Catholicism, there's this teaching of the 7 deadly sins. Properly they should not be called deadly sins. They are more like vices, because an actual sin is a bad deed that you commit. It's not, so to say, a character trait, but rather it's a bad deed. And what we call the 7 deadly sins, they are vices, meaning they are traits that might lead you to commit sins, right? So stealing is a sin and greediness is a vice. If you are greedy, that might lead you to steal, but the greediness as such is not a sin. It's the vice that brings forth the sin. Likewise, murder might be a sin. Being angry, being wrathful, is not a sin. It's a vice, but out of this vice, out of your wrath, you might commit murder. And the same is true with lust, right? The sin would be, for example, adultery, or rape or whatever. But you might do these sins because you have the vice of lust. However, this one of the 7 so-called deadly sins, the first one, is usually misinterpreted as lust, because the Latin name, and of course the Catholic thinkers would have thought and written in Latin, is luxuria, where the word luxury comes from also. And it just gets translated as lust into English. Same in modern German, by the way, where we translate it as Wollust. So nowadays we think of it as a purely sexual vice, and it does have this sexual side, this sexual connotation, to be sure, but actually it should be interpreted in a more broader sense. It could be lusting for anything, doesn't have to be something sexual. So it is about opulence, it is about lusting after, desiring things that are pleasant, but that you don't actually need. And it is a vice that is problematic because it binds you to this physical, to this material world, when actually you should rise above it. You should not depend on this material world, right? You should be focused on something higher, on something supersensual. So the Catholic teaching, of course, you should be focused on God, on heaven, on the eternal fate of your soul. And when we stick to Kant, you should be focused mainly on the moral law, on your moral duty. But where they would agree is that you should not focus on this material world and the material goods it has to offer. And so you could say that this vice of luxuria, of opulence, is precisely that. Being bound or binding yourself to things that are pleasant by wantonly treating them as more than just pleasant, treating them as something necessary. And here we get to the ancient Greek philosopher Epicurus, who is one of the thinkers that Kant appreciated the most. For a long time, during the Christian centuries, Epicurus used to be slandered, used to have a very bad reputation as a hedonist. Kant again and again, in different instances in his writings, speaks in favor of Epicurus and stresses how he was misunderstood. Kant considers him one of the greatest thinkers, maybe in a way the greatest thinker of antiquity. And he at one point calls him the philosopher of the graces, who lays down rose petals on the path of virtue. Because the Stoics, Kant says, the Stoics would suggest abstaining completely. They would suggest complete asceticism. They would say don't seek what is pleasant at all. And here Kant disagrees. Here he says this is an exaggeration. This is raving. I already gave a full lecture about how to Kant morality does not mean hating pleasure or hating sensuality. And how to Kant we should not try to stop being human, because humans are also sensual creatures, and to become disembodied angels. Not only is this not our moral duty, Kant stresses, but also it's not pragmatic. The pragmatic in Kant always means what is prudent, what leads to happiness. Because such a life where we abstain from anything pleasant would be a miserable, grumpy life, but also it would be an unhealthy life. We would deprive our body of what it needs, and this would not be good for us. On the other hand, Epicurus said, do seek pleasure in life. Do seek what feels good. But, and this is where he used to be misunderstood or used to be slandered, he's not advocating for getting lost in pleasure or for seeking extreme pleasures, for seeking excess, for indulging in orgies or whatever, but rather Epicurus recommends, and Kant agrees with him, to seek out and to be content with simple pleasures. So learn to enjoy a simple piece of bread and cheese. You don't have to always eat the most exquisite foods in order to be happy. Or learn to just enjoy the company of a good friend and conversation. And by the way, I already mentioned how Kant says that one of the issues is that when we satisfy our desires, after a time we go numb, and we will seek out new excitements or new, more extreme satisfaction of the desire. Kant says this goes for the merely physical desires, like food or like sex or whatever, but he excludes from this the social desires. He says that being in company, being with friends, having good conversation, playing games, this is the one pleasure that we don't grow numb by, or that doesn't bore us, or that we aren't fed up with after a time. Rather, this always gives us new energy, and this cultivates us as people. It cultivates our taste, it cultivates our tactfulness. So Kant very much recommends this. But anyways, in general, when Epicurus says enjoy a simple piece of bread or cheese, or enjoy a friend's company, the point is moderation. Seek pleasure, but don't overdo it. Don't seek extremes. Learn to be content with moderation. And just as I said that this extreme asceticism is neither our moral duty nor is it prudent, this moderate lifestyle is both, Kant would say. It is moral, because I gave a whole lecture about the duties towards ourselves, about how, according to Kant, we don't just have duties towards other people, rather we owe it to ourselves to live with dignity as rational beings. And getting lost in pleasure, needing all kinds of luxury and excess, that would be undignified. A lifestyle of moderation is dignified and therefore moral. But it is also prudent, it is also healthy. Kant believes that this is the best dietary advice you can give. To not overdo it, to not strain your body too much, to also not weaken your body through indulgence, but rather to don't deprive your body of all kinds of pleasures, but also not make it dependent of all kinds of pleasures. I gave a whole separate lecture on the philosopher as a healer, where I talk more extensively about what Kant has to say about a healthy lifestyle, how he recommends living your life in a healthy manner, about which the philosopher has quite a bit to say, according to Kant, because to him, the physician's job is mainly therapy, so healing you when you're already sick. But the philosopher's job, and here philosopher is meant in the broader, in the world sense, so anyone who is wise. So you yourself can be this philosopher and should be. The philosopher's job is the diet, so the lifestyle, so that you don't get sick and don't need a physician for therapy in the first place, ideally. And if you turn to that other lecture of mine, you will find that a lot of what I say there fits with what I'm saying here. Kant says the same sort of lifestyle that is most dignified also leads to a happy life, because it frees us from all the objects in the world, and so lifts up all kinds of reasons for possibly being unhappy because we don't get what we want and need. And it is also the same lifestyle, the most healthy lifestyle that is best for our body. Kant himself lived what he preached. He was not someone who deprived himself of all kinds of pleasures. He did enjoy his life, but he lived a modest life, enjoying the simple pleasures. He would say, for example, that the happiest time of his day was in the morning, when he was smoking his pipe and drinking a cup of tea and collecting his thoughts, starting the day. To Kant, the point is not that you should abstain from all kinds of pleasures, but that you should be able to abstain from all kinds of pleasures. You can allow yourself what is pleasant, but you should not need it. In this, actually, Kant probably goes a little further even than Epicurus, and agrees with Diogenes, another ancient philosopher, the Cynic philosopher. And Diogenes famously did abstain from pretty much anything, famously wanted to live according to nature, without any luxury, without any unnatural desires produced by society, by civilization. Famously, he lived in a jar like a homeless person. Famously, he had no possessions except a cup for drinking, and when he saw a child scooping up water with his hand, and he also threw away the cup. Famously, Diogenes, again, he did not abstain from pleasures, but he did not want to depend on objects for the satisfaction of his pleasures. So famously, was not sexually completely abstaining, completely chaste. Rather, he openly, in the middle of the city, masturbated. And he said that, but the point is, he masturbated. He didn't have sex, because he would say having sex would mean depending on the woman, right? Masturbating was something he could do himself. He would say that if he could satisfy his hunger by simply rubbing his stomach instead of having to eat food, then he would also prefer this instead of being dependent on the food. And of course, the lifestyle as such is very extreme, but Kant still has sympathies for Diogenes' sentiment, for wanting to be so independent and for having the strength to be so. And he says at some point that the only reason Diogenes cannot be considered a great man is that he did not plow the field and grew his own food. So basically, that he willingly lived as a homeless person and sort of a parasite on society instead of working and actively sustaining himself. Because to Kant, there are two kinds of moral duties. I talked about this in my lecture on the morality of reverence and the morality of love. To him, there are narrow duties that are more negative. They are about not harming human dignity, whether in others or in yourself. They are about not taking freedom away, whether from others or from yourself. But there are also wider duties that are about expanding human freedom. And Kant would say that Diogenes lived in accordance with the narrow duties. So, because he did not depend on anything, because he had such inner strength, because he could abstain from anything that was not a natural need to him. For that reason, he did not harm others, right? He had no reason to steal or to commit fraud or whatever. So he left their freedom intact, and he also left his own freedom intact, living with dignity. But Kant does accuse Diogenes of sort of neglecting the wider duties. He may not have acted against his own dignity, against his own freedom actively, but he did nothing to actively be free, to actually expand his freedom. But be that as it may, all in all, Kant is a sort of Epicurean. He says, do allow yourself to enjoy life, do allow yourself what is pleasant in life, but don't depend on it and don't seek extreme pleasures, rather seek being able to do without. Because if in general you are in a good state, like you're not sick, you're not in pain or anything, so you're not lacking anything necessary for life, and still you are not happy, still you are saying, I lack something for my happiness, then that is your own fault. Then that is something that does not need to be. So Kant would agree with Epicurus that nothing is sufficient to him to whom the sufficient is insufficient. Kant says, be independent of the things, and therefore be independent of your inclination towards those things. Even if you are dependent on something, even if you do need something, it should be more for rational reasons than out of a merely sensual desire. I gave an earlier lecture about the faculty of desiring, about our faculties of choice and will, where I said that to Kant, we have this faculty of choice, which, as the name suggests, chooses. Should I do A? Should I do B? Should I eat an apple? Should I eat chocolate? But the choices of, choice, they are not completely arbitrary according to Kant. Rather, they always have what he calls a driving spring. And so there is something that makes me choose A over B. And these driving springs can either be motives or stimuli. The stimuli are essential. They are what we share with the animals. So my choice can be driven to choose something because I essentially desire it, while the motives are intellectual. They come from the will, from practical reason. So my choice can be driven to choose something because I actually want it, out of deliberation, out of thinking about it. And so, for example, a diabetic who needs his insulin, sure, he does need it, but not out of essential desire, but rather because he thought about it, because he reflected on it, because this is his rational insight, that he needs this, that he should have this. And this is what Kant suggests. If you do need something, then there should be a motive, not just a stimulus. Then it should be something that you came to the rational conclusion that you needed, not that your senses require of you. Because again, it's best to live with moderation. It's best to treat the pleasant things in life as just that, just pleasant. Rather than a need, he says there should be something that cultivates our soul and that cheers up our mood. So if, for example, someone invites you to a nice dinner with very exquisite food, then you can take him up on that invitation. You don't have to completely abstain from it. You can enjoy this one evening with special food. But other evenings, when you're not invited, you should be content with your bread and cheese. You should not require this special food. This means living with more dignity, and this also means being less dependent on the outside world and what it does to you, being less dependent on fate, less dependent on other people, on, for example, whether you're invited or not. Kant likes to say that even a diamond collar still ties down the dog. So you should not seek golden chains to bind you. You should seek not having chains at all. And I want to point out as a side note that all of this means that in a way Kant's answer to the problem of suffering, of pain, of displeasure is similar to that of Buddha's. Namely, not seek lots of pleasure in life, seek to escape the pain, but rather seek to be independent, seek to get rid of your desires. Then you will also get rid of the pain. It's important to me to point out such things because I always want to stress that in the history of thinking, you don't just have random opinions. Rather, certain positions are necessary. They necessarily follow from thinking, thinking based on certain principles, on certain premises. But I also want to point out that when certain thinkers or certain traditions differ, it's also not random. Rather, there must be a reason for it. There must be, at some point, a different premise. And that is the case here too. Because Kant, of course, does not seek getting rid of desiring completely, like Buddhism does. And the reason for that is that Kant has a moral philosophy. In Buddhism, there is no such thing as morality. And I'm specifically and consciously saying Buddhism, not Buddhism, because what Buddha himself had in mind, what he himself taught, that's a different question that I want to put aside here. But Buddhism, as it is commonly understood, does not have any morality. Sure, there's an ethics of compassion, right? Recognizing that others are just like me, they suffer because they desire just like me, so I feel bad for them too. But that's not actual morality. No, I'm saying to Kant, we have a moral duty. So we are here for a reason. We are like a soldier put on his post that cannot just go away and abandon his post because it doesn't feel pleasant. So to Kant, we have a task in this life, and this is what comes first. The question of suffering and of ending your own suffering, that's simply not the main concern to Kant. But if it was, if morality was out of the question, if we had no reason to be here, then Kant would say, yes, best just stop desiring, best just stop wanting things, then you will also not be unhappy about not getting things. And if you think about this Buddhan attitude, where you don't care about morality, you only care about your own suffering and ending that. You want enlightenment, you want to attain the state of nirvana, getting rid of yourself so that you escape suffering. For all the talk of selflessness, that is quite selfish, right? You might escape your own suffering, but you leave the world behind to burn, so to say. I would say it is much more selfless to keep yourself, even if that self also leads to some sort of suffering, in order to do what is right. Which, of course, is also a concept that exists in Buddhism, which, of course, is what a bodhisattva does, right? Consciously rejecting nirvana for now in order to help others. But anyways, if we go back to Kant, I can stress once again, it is more dignified, it is also more healthy, it is more prudent to be able to do without most things, to not reject what is pleasant altogether, but to not require it for your happiness. And this is where, again, Kant's favorite Stoic quote comes into play, sustine et abstine. So, sustain yourself, bear what you have to bear, and abstain. Do without what you can do without. An advice that should get us to a place where we aren't weaklings, where we aren't soft, Kant would say, and to a place where life doesn't hit us if it takes something from us, because we can do without it. And here at this point, I want to illustrate what I said so far with an example. The example being that recently there was this rumor online on TikTok and Instagram and so on, amongst, at least in Germany, I don't know if it's spread in other European countries, but amongst all the German girlies, there was this rumor that the EU was going to prohibit glitter. And you could read posts on Instagram, on TikTok, of these girls posting, OMG, never glitter again, or no glitter, that means no stones, no diamonds on the nails, or no glitter equals no wedding dress, or if there's no glitter, then I'm emigrating, then I'm leaving the country. And actually, the EU was not going to forbid glitter altogether. It was only going to forbid certain ingredients used for glitter because of microplastics. But still, there was hoarding in certain drugstores. They were hoarding all the glitter, I don't know, lipsticks and eyeshadows and highlighters and so on. And I choose this example precisely because of how pathetic, how utterly undignified it is. Because I think with this, it is perfectly suited to illustrate what I want to say. Now, there's a lot that could be said here. We could, of course, talk about how all these girlies just blindly and uncritically believe some rumor that was posted somewhere on social media and are incapable of just investing 1 or 2 minutes into an internet research that could have cleared up that, again, not glitter was going to be forbidden, but just certain microplastics in glitter. I do not want to talk about this, but it is, of course, connected with what I am talking about, because unaufclaredness is always one and the same. In thinking, you can, of course, dissect it. You can split it up into different parts. But in life, it's one and the same posture. Unaufclaredness means not being able to lead yourself. It means being led. And here in this case, it means being led by whatever you read online. It means just blindly believing whatever you hear without being able to check, without critical thinking. But at the same time, and that's what I actually want to talk about, unaufclaredness also means being led by your desire, being a slave to your desires, to your needs, to your inclinations, in this case, the desire for glitter. And of course, this is necessarily an unaufclared desire. I mean, no one, also no girl, is born into this world desiring glitter on her nails or desiring glitter on her wedding dress. That's just not a desire that human beings as such have. Clearly, this is a desire that was created by society around you. Clearly, this is a desire these girls developed because of all the child abuse they went through. Because, yeah, you don't have to beat a child, you don't have to sexually abuse a child or whatever to abuse it. Raising it like this, raising it to be so unaufclared, to be so dependent on something so trivial and unnecessary and pathetic, that already is abuse. And in this society we live in, 99% of children, the way they are growing up, they are being abused. That's child abuse. So that is not their own true desire. They may think it is, because again, they are so uncritical, they never question themselves, but of course it is not. They are unaufklärt, the desire was given to them, it's not their own. But now they depend on it, and here precisely you can see how closely being immoral and being unhappy are connected. That is very important to me in all these lectures, right? I keep stressing this. I already said it in the lecture on how morality is not against pleasure, is not at odds with happiness. I stress that to Kant, morality and prudence are separate. They are not the same thing, to be sure, but they do align for the most part. I said that you should get rid of this cliche, of this Manichaean dichotomy that being moral, doing the right thing means self-denial, means abstinence and asceticism, while on the other hand, seeking pleasure, seeking happiness, seeking your own advantage means being an egoist who doesn't care what's right or what happens to others. No, I said, and I keep stressing, that Kant shows us that for the most part, the moral person is also the most happy person. And here we can see this. Because it goes without question that these girls are utterly immoral. Because all they care about is themselves, their own looks, being sparkly, glittering. I mean, the EU was going to pass this law because of microplastics, because of the environment, and also because of our own health. How could you possibly be against that? It should be absolutely uncontroversial. But they don't care. They care so little that they didn't even talk about it at all. They didn't spare a word for why this glitter would be forbidden. They just complained about how this prohibition would ruin their lives, their specific lives, as if their life and their pleasure is all that matters. I mean, even if the EU had really prohibited glitter altogether, as a normal, rational, aufklärt person, you would accept that. If that was what is needed to save the environment and to save our health, if glitter in general was bad, then yeah, let's get rid of it. And that would not affect your life much, right? Like for me, if glitter was forbidden, absolutely nothing would change in my life because I don't need shiny, sparkly nails. So these girls, they are absolutely immoral. They would let the whole world burn just so that their fingernails can sparkle. And I don't actually have to speak in the conditional here. I don't have to say would. They are letting the world burn. It is these kinds of people that are responsible for the climate crisis. It is their self-centeredness, their egocentrism, their mindless consumerism that leads to the greatest catastrophe in human history, that leads to the complete breakdown of our civilization, possibly. There's not some big grand conspiracy. There's not some evil overlord that consciously wants to destroy everything. No, it's really just a bunch of mindless girls that want glitter on their nails. And of course, other people that want other things. But it's this kind of attitude. So, them being immoral, that's out of the question. That should be obvious. But it should also be equally obvious that they are deeply unhappy people. I mean, just look at how devastated they were, how they desperately bogged up all the glittery, all the sparkly stuff they could still find in the drugstores, just because of something so insignificant. And sure, this is a one-time thing, and by now they might have realized that glitter, in fact, was not forbidden. But if this one thing can make them unhappy, then you can be absolutely sure that there are many other things every single day of their lives that will make them unhappy. Right? If I depend so much on having sparkly nails or eyelashes or sparkly wedding dress, then I probably also depend on lots of other things. And then every day, pretty much, something will happen not the way I would like it to happen. Every day, I will probably be deprived of something I would like to have. I mean, let's just stick to the example of the wedding dress. And by the way, all the things I mentioned, they are real quotes. They are things that were actually said on social media. So someone actually said, OMG, no glitter, that equals no wedding dress. So clearly, without knowing this person, you can be absolutely sure that a sparkly wedding dress is not all she wants. She will probably have 1,000 other demands for her wedding. She will probably want a big, perfect Disney princess wedding, and the sparkly dress is probably just one small piece of it. Again, this is not a normal desire you should have. I mean, as a rational person, when it comes to marriage, first off, you will probably not care about having an official wedding at all. What you will care about is maybe having a person in your life that you love and spending your life with that person. That's marriage. For all intents and purposes, that is marriage. As Fichte would say, people cannot be married by the state or by the church. The state or the church cannot bind two hearts together that aren't bound together. People can only marry themselves to each other. When two people love each other and dedicate their lives to each other, they are married. Period. Fichte says this whole legal wedding is not really getting married, it's rather your marriage that already exists being recognized as such by the state. Right? You sort of go to the state and announce, we are married. We do want to spend our lives together. Please recognize our marriage as such, with all the consequences like changing name or having tax benefits or whatever. But this recognition of the state, this marriage certificate you get, is not truly what binds you together. So as a rational person, you probably don't even need that. And if you do want to have some sort of ceremony or party, what you will want is have a nice day with your loved ones. So most of all with the person you are marrying, maybe also with friends and family, just have a good time, create a nice memory. But you will not need this perfect wedding that you can post on Instagram. That's simply not a natural desire, and not having it is not something that could possibly make any person unhappy, unless the person turned themselves into someone who is dependent on that and who is unhappy without it. And if you are like this, like absolutely needing the sparkly wedding dress, like I say, you may need thousands of other things, and you therefore get thousands of other opportunities to be unhappy. So, for example, one story I know about is where the bride had this idea that all her bridesmaids had to have the same height because that looked better or whatever. And so, since of course by nature they had different heights, they had to wear different kinds of high heels. Now, the problem was that she happened to have one very tall friend and one very petite friend. And so, even with the tall friend wearing flat shoes, which, however, she didn't like aesthetically, so the bride, that is, um, the small friend, still to be level head with her, um, had to wear very, very high heels. However, this the bride also disliked because she said, "Oh, with such high heels, you look like a stripper. That's not appropriate for my wedding." And then the bride actually got agitated over this, got angry over this. Tears were shed over this, and in the end, she told her two friends that they should talk to each other and decide amongst themselves which of them is a true friend, and the other should step down from being a bridesmaid. As if it was somehow the friend's fault, as if somehow they were ruining the wedding by daring to have these different heights. I mean, this obviously is not something they chose. This is just how they are. And to me, the only thing I don't get here is why they didn't just both step down and leave this friend. The thing I don't get is how such a person, who probably didn't start being like that on her wedding, who's probably always been like this, how such a person has friends at all. Or how such a person can find a man that wants to marry her for. I mean, I would not want to be married to someone like that. Life with a person like that as their friend or even as their husband must be terrible. So this is something I never got, how people like that are not completely socially isolated, how anyone would ever want to even be in the same room as them. But then there's lots of things I don't get. I also don't get why people like that can vote and their vote counts just as much as mine. Nor do I get why we allow for these people. And again, it is these people that are responsible. It is these people that are guilty with their mindlessness, with their consumerism. How we allow for them to ruin life for everyone on this planet for the next thousands of years. But it is what it is. And my point is that here too in this story you see how this person is clearly immoral, disregarding her friends, causing problems, causing distress where none need to be. But you also clearly see how such a person with such not just desires. Again, it would be one thing if you say, "Oh, it would be pleasant for me if my wedding dress sparkled," or "It would be pleasant for me if all my bridesmaids happened to have the same height," but rather this wantonness, treating what is merely pleasant and nice as something necessary, as something you cannot do without, you can clearly see how this is the key to an unhappy life, how this is something that, because you never quite get what you want, because always something will not go according to plan, how this will cause you again and again so much displeasure in life. And as a side note, some people, some ideologies, I'm thinking of the woke, liberal, left feminists, they might dislike the way I'm talking about these kinds of girls here. And that gives me an opportunity to talk about the liberal concept of freedom and about their sort of morality. I already did that more extensively in my lecture, What is Freedom, to Kant? But maybe this example will help some people better understand what I said in that lecture. Or the other way around, maybe if you watch that lecture, it will better help you understand this example here. The true freedom that matters to Kant means following your own rational insight, understanding what is right as you have thought about it, and then doing what you understood to be right. But the liberals, and I pointed out in that other lecture that nowadays almost all people on the left or on the right, doesn't matter, are liberals. The liberals think freedom means doing whatever you want without questioning why do you want it, and is it even really you who wants it, right? So they would have to say that a drug addict is free if he gets his drugs because that's what he wants. While Kant would say the drug addict would be free if he was thinking about whether it's good to take drugs, came to the conclusion that he shouldn't take drugs, and then was able to follow that conclusion rather than continually being driven by his addiction. But the liberals don't want to question themselves. They don't want to ask what is right or what is wrong. To them, freedom means being able to do whatever they want to do and being left alone with it. And now the left liberals, they might be more about being allowed to have abortions, being allowed to have sex with whomever they want, being allowed to choose their pronouns, being allowed to look whatever they want to look like. The right-wing liberals, they might want to carry weapons, or here in Germany to drive without speed limit. They want to keep driving their cars, eating their meat, flying around, and so on. Or they want to keep using words that might trigger others. So they have different things they care about, but their basic posture is the same. They want this liberal freedom. They do not want to be questioned. And from liberals, you might hear phrases like live and let live. What business is it of yours? Everyone has their own taste. Or the especially dishonest, no one's getting harmed, so you have no right to criticize it. Of course, someone's getting harmed, usually. They just believe that the only harm that matters is if you personally go and directly punch someone in the face. But if that's the only sort of harm you care about, then you would also have to excuse people like Eichmann, who didn't themselves shoot anyone or turn on the gas in a gas chamber, but who were bureaucrats sitting on a desk, filling out forms, giving orders. No, of course, in this society we live in, this capitalist exploitative society, destroying the environment, profiting from slave labor, letting wars be fought for resources. Of course, when you engage in this consumerism, or of course when you fly on vacation, of course you are harming people. So even by your own standards, it would be other people's business. But that's not even what I want to care about here, because as I already mentioned, to Kant, we don't just have moral duties towards others, we have moral duties towards ourselves. We should live in accordance with our own dignity. And that is what the liberal, to whom freedom means being a slave to my desires, which clearly is very undignified. So this is what the liberal doesn't do. And I want to point out again, such people like these girls I talked about who are so obsessed with glitter and shiny stuff, they're clearly not happy. So you should ask yourself, if you are of these liberals, these liberal feminists that want to protect and defend them here, what are you even defending them against? You are fighting for their right to stay unhappy. You don't want their sensitivities to be hurt. You don't want them to be triggered. You don't want them to feel bad, because someone like me talks about them the way they really are and points out how pathetic they are. But that essentially just means you want them to stay pathetic. And here I would point you to Nietzsche, who, in response to the slave morality that he criticizes and that he constantly talks about compassion and empathy and so on, in response to that would say, you claim to be compassionate and that I am not compassionate, that I lack empathy, that I am cruel. But the thing is, you are compassionate for the human being as he is. For, as Kant would say, the homo phenomenon, the human being as he appears. In all his smallness and pettiness and patheticness. And this compassion of yours is very cruel and lacking in empathy towards humanity, towards what Kant would call the homo noumenon, the idea of the human being as he could be. And I have compassion exactly for humanity, for what could be great and sublime and excellent. And it is out of this compassion, out of this higher empathy, not out of lack of empathy, that I am what you might perceive as being cruel or lacking compassion towards the human beings as they are in their patheticness. Because let's face it, once again, these girls I was talking about, they were not born this way, they were made that way through abuse. Growing up in a way that makes you turn out like this is child abuse. And they could be so much more. I'm not dehumanizing them. The people who don't want them criticized, the people who demand safe spaces for them, they are dehumanizing them. Because they are implying that such girls could not be more than the pathetic thing that they are. Well, I am saying they could and they should be more. And it is a travesty and it is a crime that they were crippled so much, that their hearts, their souls were crippled like that. They are of the same humanity as Kant. There's nothing that really prevents them from being such great thinkers, such great revolutionary minds. Instead, they are this, caring about glitter on their nails, being devastated because they think they cannot have a shiny wedding dress. Or let's not think of Kant. Let's stay with other women and let's stay in our time. Nothing prevents any of these girls from being Greta Thunberg, who probably in her whole life did not have anything on her nails a single time. At least I'm not aware that she ever did. A person who is so good, so courageous, so just, so compassionate, so full of integrity, a person who is worth millions, they could be like her. And they should be like her. And if more were like her, then everything would be good and just on this world. Then there wouldn't be any problems. There wouldn't be any wars or exploitation or destruction of the environment. So it is not compassion to look at a person that was systematically, I'm not saying consciously, but I am saying systematically, that was systematically crippled and depraved of what he could be, and then to tell others, leave the person in this crippled state. No, you should have more compassion, not with people as they are, but with what people could and should be. You should aufklär yourself enough to be guided by the idea of humanity. But I digress. I want to go back to what Kant has to say about happiness, and specifically about happiness through being able to do without things, happiness through modesty. I talked about this in general so far, but Kant gives some specific pieces of advice how we can achieve this, how we can go about this, and I want to briefly go through these pieces of advice. Kant's first advice would be restrain your desires and limit them to that which you can actually attain. In his terminology, this would mean don't have wishes. Now, I already explained in my lecture on the faculty of desiring, on will and choice, that Kant doesn't use the word wish as we do in everyday life. To him, a wish is not simply everything you would like to have. Rather, it is something that you cannot attain. So if I'm hungry, I don't have a wish for food. I have a desire for food, but it's not a wish because I can just go to the fridge and get myself some food. But wanting a dead loved one back, or wanting to be able to fly or whatever, that would be a wish. A wish is an unrealistic desire. So in that sense, Kant says, try to be without wishes. But even when it comes to things that are not completely unrealistic, unattainable, that hypothetically you could get, but that are unsure, or where the means of attaining them are not reliable, even here you should try to not have such needs. This is especially true for desires whose fulfillment depends on other people. Again, I already explained in the lecture on affections and passions that this precisely is what breeds passions. You develop passions, for example, a passionate greed or passionate lust for power, or passionate desire for honor and reputation, because other people with their free will are unreliable, and you desire means, secure and reliable means of influencing or controlling other people. And if you want something from others and you desperately need it, but then those others don't give it to you, then you will be unhappy by necessity. And also you will easily start growing resentment and hatred, right? So think as one example of sex. Sex, of course, is something where we need other people to give it to us. We cannot just attain it ourselves, unless we rape maybe. And so therefore, if sex is a need for you and now you don't get it, well, think of all the incels who become misogynist. So because they don't treat it as just something pleasant, that, okay, if it happens, that's nice. But if it doesn't happen, that's okay. It's not a need. I can do without it. Rather, they have this wantonness. They treat it as something necessary. and therefore they start resenting the women who don't give them sex. They start believing stuff like all women are sluts because they don't want to have sex with me. Because as we all know, that's the definition of a slut, right? A woman that does not have sex with someone. A second advice of Kant's would be that he says, even when it comes to things that maybe you can have, you should still try to not let them turn into needs. And here it can be helpful to just remind yourself how many people manage or managed to live and to live happily without certain things. Because it is easy to get used to something or to tell yourself that it is necessary for happiness. But when you realize that others can be happy without it, then maybe this will change. This goes, of course, for pretty much all our modern luxury and technology that we are so used to. For the most time of human existence, people lived without this, right? So in the climate debate, at least here in Germany, you often hear people accusing climate activists of wanting to bring us back into the Middle Ages or even back into the Stone Ages. Of course, that's completely stupid polemics. Of course, there are no such plans. No one ever claimed that it's needed to completely get rid of all technology. But I mean, if it was, let's say hypothetically, that this really was necessary in order to protect the climate, then yeah, sure, I would choose it. I mean, if it really came down to the choice between living in the Middle Ages or not living at all, having our civilization completely and utterly destroyed and making this planet uninhabitable, if this was really the choice, which again, of course, it isn't, but then I would rather choose the Middle Ages. And I would simply remind myself that people used to live in the Middle Ages. In fact, for the whole Middle Ages, that's how long they used to live in the Middle Ages. And it's, of course, absurd to think that there was no happiness back then, that no one was content with their lives. And of course, this goes for many other modern luxuries. Like if people say they have to eat meat every day. No, you don't have to. It's simply a lie. I mean, you can be honest and say, I want to eat meat every day and I don't feel like stopping, and I don't care about the animals, I don't care about the climate. Okay, you can be honest. But you cannot possibly tell me that you need this. That's a lie. You just have to remind yourself that vegetarians or vegans exist. And even if there was only one single vegetarian in human history, that would already be enough to disprove what you're saying. Clearly, it is possible for some people to live entirely without meat. And you cannot tell me that all these people are unhappy and suffering terribly and never enjoying a meal. No, of course not. Of course, it is possible to never eat meat and still enjoy your food. Or when people say, I want to keep flying into vacation. I mean, only some decades ago, pretty much no one did this. I mean, even now, pretty much no one does this. If you fly once a year, you already belong to the 3% of the world population that fly the most. 80 to 90% of people never, even once in their life, have flown in an airplane. But in the past, obviously no one was flying. And this is not a past that was very far ago, right? I mean, even just in the 50s and 60s, here after the Second World War, when of course we did not live like the Middle Ages. I mean, people had electric lamps, they had TVs, they had fridges. This was not the Middle Ages. Um, but still, for the most part, they were not flying on vacation like they are doing nowadays. Um, like in the days of my grandparents and the um, early years of my dad and his youth, um, Germans for vacation, they would sit in their car and drive over the Alps to Italy. Sure, that took a little bit longer than doing it by plane. That was probably also a little less comfortable. Um, but then on the other hand, that was still much more comfort and luxury than you could have had another 100 years before, when that same trip would probably have taken weeks or whatever. So, really, you can just remind yourself how many people live a happy life without the thing you absolutely need. Ask any young teenager now if they need their phone. Many will probably say yes. But again, ask them, do you really believe that for millennia all young people were constantly unhappy, did not have a single happy day in their lives? Um, of course, they managed perfectly fine to still live good lives, doing other stuff, meeting their friends in person, actually having actual conversations, playing games, going outside, whatever. So no one can claim that they need their phone. And if this is what you remind yourself of, how many people manage to do perfectly fine without whatever you think you need, then maybe that will help you stop thinking you need it. A third advice would be, don't let any desire turn into an inclination, even if the means of fulfilling it are within your power. Here you can once again go back to my lecture on the faculty of desiring and on choice and will, where I explained that to Kant there are three basic types of desires, uh, which he finds through his architectonic method based on his table of categories. Both topics I have also discussed in previous lectures already. Um, so Kant says there are these 12 categories of our intellect in which we are thinking. Any thought you could possibly have happens within these 12 basic categories. And so, if you want to take a specific thought, like for example, the concept of desire, you can categorize the different types of this thing that could possibly exist, that could possibly be conceptualized a priori, meaning before making any experience, based on this table of categories. Again, if you want to understand that better, turn to the lecture on the table of categories. But within the table of categories, there are three categories of modality. Anything exists in one of three modes. Either it is possible, or it actually exists, or it is necessary, or the opposites of these three. So it is impossible, it does not exist, or it is contingent. And so this also goes for desires. And as I explained in the lecture on the faculty of desiring, a merely possible desire to Kant is a propensity, right? It is possible that I don't desire something, maybe because I don't know it. I don't know that it could bring pleasure to me, but I still have a propensity for it in my nature, meaning I could start desiring it if I got to know it. So someone could never have drunken alcohol and therefore have no desire to drink alcohol, but could still have a propensity for drunkenness or even for alcoholism. Meaning, if they ever were to try alcohol, they would probably be in danger of getting addicted to it. Second, based on the category of existence, there's the actual desire. This is what Kant calls desire, a desire that I have. Um, this is in itself not a problem. It becomes a problem if we turn to the third category, the category of necessity. A necessary desire, this is what Kant calls inclination. It's in the word itself, the German word being Neigung. Neigung also means a slope. Neigen as a verb means to skew or to bend. So a Neigung, a slope, if you place a ball on it, it is necessary that it rolls down, right? Likewise, a Neigung as a desire, so an inclination, is a necessary desire. You can't help it, you need this thing. You don't just desire it, you need it. And this, if possible, should be prevented. Now, I also said in that other lecture that some inclinations, according to Kant, are natural. They come from instinct, right? So, for example, we have a natural inclination for food. We need to eat. It's a natural desire. The inclination for love, so our sexuality, that might be a little less necessary. We can live without sex, while we can't live without food. But still, it is a strong desire born out of a natural instinct. And those inclinations are all right to Kant. Again, he does not say that we need to fight and be at war with our own nature, or that we need to become disembodied spirits. But he says we should not go beyond our nature. We should not let our nature run wild. We should not develop unnatural desires or inclinations. And how do inclinations come about if not through a natural instinct? Well, mostly through getting used to something, Kant says. An inclination, therefore, he also calls a habitual desire. If you are in the habit of desiring something, and if you are in the habit of again and again satisfying, fulfilling a desire, then it will turn from a mere desire to an inclination, right? So from doing something once or twice, you barely ever get addicted to it. But if you keep doing it, if you get used to it, then maybe eventually it becomes a need and you cannot do without it anymore, right? This is true for actual addictions like drug addictions, right? So it's not a big problem if you smoke like once or twice. The first time smoking will probably turn you off smoking more than get you into smoking. And some people may manage to only do it rarely. Like, for example, my grandma for years, she would smoke like twice a year, like one cigarette at Christmas. And okay, she managed to keep it at that. But she herself said that she could feel the pull. She could feel that if she would smoke more, then she would not be able to stop anymore. So it is a dangerous game, maybe. But if you can do it, fair enough. But if you keep smoking, it becomes a habit, and many smokers will realize that they probably are used to smoking in certain situations, like when you get up in the morning or in your break or after sex or whatever, or when you are stressed, for example. And if this has already become a habit, that whenever you are in this situation, you grab the next cigarette, then it's hard to get out of that habit again. By the way, the word addiction as such did not yet exist in the 18th century. It's not something that Kant uses. But what we call addiction nowadays, this is also a necessary desire, right? So, in his categorization, he would probably call an addiction simply a very strong inclination. And indeed, um, he does talk about the inclination towards drunkenness or the inclination for opium that some people have. So clearly, to him, addictions are sorts of inclinations. But um, of course, you can also have other inclinations, and it's also always about having gotten used to something, right? We are not born needing phones or needing cars. But if you're constantly on your phone, like many people are nowadays, then it becomes an inclination. And now, if the phone is taken from you, you feel bad because now it has become a need and you don't know what to do with yourself without constantly looking at your phone. So, Kant would say desires are fair enough, but inclinations, if they don't come from natural instincts, but those that have grown out of habits, those we should avoid. So I will point out that Kant not always distinguishes clearly between them. So here his terminology is not always consistent. Often he uses the word inclination as more or less synonymous with desire. But in the places where he is more strict terminologically, there an inclination always means a necessary, a habitual desire. And those are, you could say, a curse, a bane of civilization. Kant would say the natural human being, the savage, might have propensities. So he could possibly develop inclinations. He also has desires, but he has no inclinations. Here again, we have this naive modesty. The savage may not have the wise modesty. He does not live a simple life of moderation because he consciously chose it, but because he's used to it and he doesn't know anything else. But the more civilized we become, the more culture expands, the more desires we get and the more opportunities for satisfying desires and for repeated satisfaction of desires, and therefore for this becoming a habit and growing into an inclination. And this is precisely where Kant agrees with Rousseau, who very much influenced him, and says that as much as the happiness or the fortune of states increases, the happiness or fortune of individuals decreases. By which he means that when the civilization expands, when a nation becomes more wealthy, then sure, you can say that all in all, as a whole, this civilization has it better, right? Like you can, if you look nowadays at a country in the global north, like my country of Germany, and compared with some poor global south country, you will say, okay, they have the better life. But if you look at the actual individuals in that country, many of them are probably more unhappy because they have developed more unnecessary needs. They have developed more inclinations and therefore more reasons to be unhappy, right? Think again of this glitter addiction. I don't think some tribal girl somewhere in some small primitive tribe is unhappy because she will not have a shiny wedding dress. Kant, however, would not go quite as far as Rousseau in saying we have to go back to nature, or he would not say that civilization necessarily makes us unhappy. He would just say that the unaufklärt people, they would be happier in the state of nature. If you want to still be happy in civilization, then you need to clear yourself auf. You need to become wise, right? Because you are happy with modesty. In civilization, if you don't live in the state of nature, you will not have the naive modesty. So now you need the wise modesty. And if you are not wise enough to choose modesty, yes, then, but only then, not in all cases, only then, would it be better for you to live without civilization, to live in this, so to say, enforced naive modesty and not know any better. Because habit forms inclinations, and therefore chains that chain us down, that make us unfree. For that very reason, I keep telling people, like I keep telling friends, to be careful what they get into and what they get used to. And in some cases, it's best to not even get started with something. Like, for example, I basically live my life as if planes didn't exist. So, if I absolutely had to go somewhere further away in another country, um, I would check if there's a train going there or a bus or something. Sure, that might take a little longer, it might be a little less comfortable, but again, I simply live as if planes didn't exist, as if that wasn't an option. Like that's what our ancestors did until some not very long time ago, until some decades ago. If you had to go to another country, that's what you would have done. You would have found some way to go overland or to go by ship or whatever. And I know of people who started out for environmental reasons, maybe using the bus, using the train, but then one time they allowed themselves, for one reason or another, to use the plane, and because it was so much easier, more convenient, and quicker, from then on they would always use the plane. So better to not even get started, to not breed an inclination. Same with cars, right? I don't have a driver's license. It's not something you need here in Berlin. There's public transport. There's the subway, there's the trains, there's the tram, there's buses. I've lived here over 30 years and I get anywhere I want. And this is how I lived even as a kid. We never had a car. So I never got used to that. So again, I basically live as if cars didn't exist. And maybe once in a while, in a specific situation, when I'm with acquaintances a bit further away and they offer to drive by car, I might get into the car. And then again, in the sense of Kant, it can be something pleasant, but not something I need. But here too, I would give advice to a friend. Okay, you moved to the edge of the city now. There's a bus 2 streets away from your new home. You can always take this bus, it comes regularly. If you now take your family's car and get used to using this car, even though it's just 15 or 20 minutes with the bus, if you get started to get used to that, then you will not be able to stop again. It's for this reason that Kant says the desires of a person are not his fault. You have the desires you have, you didn't choose them. You cannot be blamed for your desires, but you can be blamed for your inclinations that you allowed to grow out of habit. That's an important point, I think, because too often people judge others simply for their desires. I mean, take someone who has pedophile desires. That in itself is not something he chose, probably. Maybe it's something he suffers from, right? I mean, there are many who suffer from that, who feel bad about it, who try to suppress such desires. They should be met with understanding and with help and not be judged. But if you act on those desires, for example, start watching child pornography and get used to it, and thereby it turns into an inclination, into a need, into something you cannot go without, then of course this very much is something you can and should be blamed and judged for. And of course, this goes for sexuality in general, right? Not just for pedophilia. I would say with sexuality that in our society, almost everything that people might think of as their inclinations um, is something that has been bred and grown through habit and through the society that surrounds them, or maybe through the pornography they consumed, or through the actual sex they engaged in. Um, Whatever they think their kinks or fetishes are that they cannot do without, they probably could do without. They have just gotten so used to them that it's an inclination. Or whatever they think, whatever type of person they are attracted to. Um, I mean, attraction, desire is one thing, but if it's an inclination, if it's a need, like if guys nowadays say, oh, a woman that I have sex with has to look a certain way, like she has to be thin, or she has to be completely shaved. It's not a natural desire. That was probably, let's be honest, that was probably created by you watching too much porn where they are all shaved. And if you constantly wank to shaved women, then of course, at some point, that's all you are into. And now you need this. Now it's an inclination. But that is your fault for allowing that inclination to grow. We are more happy if we avoid such inclinations. And this also avoids the problem I mentioned earlier, that if we constantly satisfy a desire, we go numb. If we constantly satisfy a desire, we also get used to it. We also turn it into an inclination, into a necessary desire. But at the same time, we go numb, and it satisfies us less. So, ironically, constantly going after a certain desire, a certain kind of satisfaction, is sort of self defeating. And for that reason, Kant says better to not completely abstain, but to only allow yourself certain satisfactions sometimes, like going into the theater, or drinking wine, or whatever is not, or eating cake is not something you have to do every day. Maybe you do it once a week, or maybe even only once a month. And that way, not only does it not turn into something that you need and cannot do without anymore, something that controls you, but also that way you're not so easily fed up with it and becoming unable to enjoy it. Rather, it stays a certain pleasure that when you allow yourself to have it is very nice, but the other times when you forbid it for yourself, you are not suffering from this lack. This advice leads me directly to the next one that Kant often gave to his students. And so basically to young men or even to teenagers, because back then often people would study a bit earlier, so like at 16 or so they would probably start going to university. And Kant often advises you don't have to completely abstain from certain pleasures in life. Again, that would be a Stoic exaggeration. But Kant says it's a good Epicurean practice to abstain for a time, to not directly throw yourself into all possible pleasures you can have, but to consciously keep some pleasures for later, to keep some in prospect. That way you precisely avoid developing inclinations and going numb early on, and that way you always keep something to look forward to. If in your youth you already indulge in any possible pleasure, then in your later age there's nothing left for you. Rather, you are now hooked on these things, you now cannot do without them. If, on the other hand, in your youth you live a more modest or more frugal life, when you still have the strength to do so, then later in older age, you can still allow yourself a bit more comfort, a bit more pleasures. And now this is a nice addition to what you had previously. Because it's always easier to go from lesser to more than the other way around, right? Kant says that a poor person who suddenly gets money, like wins the lottery or whatever, or inherits from a rich relative that dies childless or whatever, he has now won something. And that might be an improvement on his life, and he might be happy about it because his life got enriched. But on the other hand, the rich person who already grew up rich and was always rich and used to all sorts of luxury, if he suddenly became poor and suddenly had to do without all these luxuries, he would probably have a much harder time with the same lifestyle that the poor person had from the start, simply because he was used to more. And I'm not here talking about someone who goes completely poor and now has to live on the street or starve or whatever. Let's say he loses money, but he still has enough to live. But still, just having to live a more modest lifestyle would probably be harder for him after already having been used to all the luxury. So it's better to go from less to more than from more to less. And so therefore it's good often to take things slowly. So Kant says friendship, for example, does not have to start right away with the greatest closeness. You can grow close in time. I think what he says about friendship is also very much true for love, for romantic relationships, right? And this, I think, is especially important in our time because many people rush so much. Like they get together after the first date. I know people that did online dating and they get an account, and then after 2 or 3 days on a dating platform, someone invites them, and next week they meet, and at the end of the day, they already have their first kiss, and now they are a couple. And or people go into bed with each other, sleep with each other right away. And here my point is not that I want to say this is necessarily bad or you mustn't do this or this is necessarily immoral. Of course, when people say, oh, this is some sort of sin, that is just superstition. That's not what I'm talking about. But what I am saying is that if you immediately get together, immediately have sex, or if you already move in together after like 2 or 3 months of dating, then yeah, you are doing it all at once, and there's nothing left, so to say, to look forward to. And maybe it could be nicer and healthier to take things slow. There's its own sort of pleasure into first flirting with someone, first trying to get close with someone, in enjoying and really savoring each step, holding hands for the first time, kissing for the first time, and so on. There's no need to rush, right? If you get together on the first day, if you kiss or have sex right away, you cannot flirt anymore later on. if you first spend some weeks or months or even years flirting, you can still kiss or have sex later on. Um, so this way, it's not like you lose something. And if I look around, of course, this is anecdotal because it's not like I know that many people that it would be statistically significant. Um, so I would be interested in seeing a statistic. I would be interested if someone had conducted such a study. But I can say, if I look around amongst the people I know and the couples I know, um, then it seems to me that those couples that took it more slowly and that took their time with each other are the more functional and the more healthy couples overall, while those people that got together or even moved together very quickly um, have much more dysfunctional or much more toxic relationship. Again, this is my anecdotal experience. This is, of course, not statistically relevant. But I think Kant has a very good point when he says that taking things slow and keeping some things that are pleasant but not needed for later is very helpful for our overall happiness, and also for keeping these as things that are not needed, that are only pleasant. Um, Again, I mean, if I look at myself, the way I grew up, at first we didn't even have a TV. Only when I was like 5 years old or so, I got a TV. And it's not like my first 5 years were unhappy. Like as a child, I did not have anything to play with. I had a very happy childhood. And then when the TV came, it was an enrichment. Now, in addition to my previous games, I could also watch some stuff on TV, some children's shows. But before that, I had not lacked the TV. And then only when I was like 11, I got a computer. And okay, now I could play some games on the computer also. Um, but before that, I had been happy without them and not lacking anything. On the other hand, nowadays you have kids that basically grow up in front of a screen, that have a phone from early on and so on, that have TVs and consoles and everything. And now, if they had to be without these things suddenly, if they had to suddenly give up their phone or whatever, they would be unhappy. In the same way as I already said, like when I was a child, we did not go on vacation by plane. I did not fly anywhere except like 2 times. And I didn't miss it. There's so much here in Berlin and the surrounding countryside you can do. There's so many places you can go. There's no need for going somewhere else. And then in later years, now when I do happen to go somewhere else, okay, that can be nice, but it's not something that is needed. It's not an inclination of mine. If too early on you already start with certain pleasures instead of keeping them for later, it might be impossible eventually to go without them. And here especially, it's important how we grow up. And for everything I say, it's important to say that Kant says it matters how we raise our children, and we should already start here in how we raise our children. We should raise them in a way to not breed inclinations, to not get them so used to certain pleasures that they become needs. I will talk specifically about Kant's pedagogy at a much later point when I get to Kant's anthropology. But I can say it already here that this is a huge issue in our world because people are so unaufklärt. they lack so much self-reflection that they don't question themselves and the way they are. I mean, it would be one thing to say, okay, I was ruined as a child by my parents. Now I have certain inclinations. Now I cannot do without certain things, and I'm maybe too weak to change that. But at least I will do better in my child. But unfortunately, as I say, people lack this self reflection to problematize these things even in themselves. Like, if the girl that needs shiny nails or shiny wedding dress becomes a mother, she will probably not say, okay, so my mother ruined me because she was a bad example to me, or because she made me grow up on Barbie movies instead of on something proper. Um, Now I'm dependent on this glitter, but I don't want my daughter to become dependent on this glitter, so I will raise her better. Someone could say, okay, I cannot go without meat, so I have to kill animals or I have to ruin the climate, um, because growing up, my parents served me meat and I simply got used to it. Um, but I don't have to repeat that in my children. But unfortunately, since the people are not self reflective enough to think that anything is wrong with themselves, it's not even the case that they are too weak to fix themselves. They also don't even think about, can I raise my child into someone who doesn't need to be fixed in the first place, who already is healthy, who already is aufklärt. If I wanted to go more in depth about this point, I could go into my dad's philosophy and his whole philosophy of time and allowing yourself time and space, because I would say this is a problem here. People throw themselves into something without first feeling that there is a space for them. Kind of as if you were walking by throwing yourself forward, falling from one foot into the other, without first feeling that there is free space into which you're putting your foot and where you can stand securely. But this would go beyond Kant, so it's not a place here to get into this. Instead, I want to talk about yet another advice of Kant's that is connected to this point, and that is that Kant says, never sacrifice the whole for a part. Like, for example, don't sacrifice the whole of your life or don't sacrifice your age for your youth. That's unfortunately something that many people do. They are completely used to only being in the moment. The unaufklärt person is always a prisoner of the moment, and only being focused on what pleasure they can have in the moment, not thinking, or at least not caring about what will come out of it in the future, right? Like, sure, now in the moment you can go on a party and get blackout drunk, but that means sacrificing your overall health and well being. Maybe you will have fun in the moment, but tomorrow you will have a headache. And sure, some people may say that's worth it, but that means you will live your life as a roller coaster. You will have certain heights with pleasure, but this pleasure is balked at the cost of certain displeasure. On the other hand, if you live a more Epicurean life of moderation, then you will think of your overall well-being, your overall health, and you will not, for something that might please you now in this moment, sacrifice the whole or the rest of your life. Kant mentions this at several times as an advice of prudence. To him, this is a point about a happy life. But I would say that if you think about it, this goes far beyond. This is also important for morality. Because the only reason our world is as it is because people are so used to sacrificing the whole for a part. If they didn't do that, there would be no wars, there would be no exploitation, no capitalist hamster wheel economy, no destruction of our environment. I mean, why would someone suffer all their day in a stressful job or work hard in a factory? Maybe thinking that someday when he retires, he can have a better life, or his children can have a better life. Or why would someone sit in a trench and be shot at from the other side? Who would do that voluntarily? You only do that because you got used to sacrificing, to enduring, accepting certain displeasure in return for other promised pleasures. Which is precisely why our society makes sure to train people into that, even in school. I'm not saying this is some conscious conspiracy by those in power, of course. No, this is largely unconscious. This is not a plan that the teachers have. But still, in our society, with its hierarchy, with its capitalism, this is a necessity. School has to train children into sacrificing their own happiness for something else. So, for example, school trains you to endure boring lessons, or to stress yourself, to overwork yourself with homework in order to have a good grade, because they promise you a good job later on. I would not play that game. For me, even in elementary school, I had classmates that were so stressed from the load of homeworks that they cried at home. My dad would have none of that. He told me, if it gets too much, don't do it. If need be, I will take up the fight with your teachers. I will tell your teachers it's not his fault that he didn't do his homework. I forbid it. I didn't let him do that. But you don't overstress yourself. And at a later point, like around ninth grade, I stopped doing homework altogether. Like in my last 3 or 4 years of school, I simply refused to do homework, except in some instances, because it simply felt beneath me. It's undignified. I mean, I already was the best in my class. I already got the top marks. So what's the point? It's just a completely stupid and pointless exercise that just wastes time that I could use better for other things that are actually fun, just because the teacher dictates it. Who is he? Who is the teacher? Why should he have authority? Just because he happens to be a teacher, just because that happens to be his job, and because I happen to be forced into his class? No, I only want to submit to reason. I only want to submit to what makes sense, not to assumed authority. So even back then, before having read any philosophers, I already had, you could say, propensity for becoming a philosopher. And this is precisely why today, this society as it is, with people like me, it wouldn't work. You could not get me to work 40 hours a week in some office job. Either I would break or they would break, but this could not go on for a long time. So don't, Kant says, don't allow yourself to only focus on a part and to sacrifice the whole for that part, rather seek happiness in the whole. The way I would say it since my childhood is, I want to be happy and cheerful. I'm not working my ass off towards some future promise of luck and fortune, and stressing myself for that in the present. No, every step of the way, I might work towards something, but even while working towards it, I already want to feel good. I always want to be happy and cheerful. And this is what you should strive for. Kant talks about the constantly cheerful heart, which is what the sage, the wise person, has. You should not give up on that cheerful heart in some moments just because they promise you, or because you tell yourself that in exchange you will gain some happiness, some pleasure in some other moment. I want to come to the last piece of advice. And this one especially makes me think of my dad's philosophy, because to my dad, it was always an important point to stress that life only knows yes. It doesn't know, it doesn't understand a no. And this philosophy of affirmation instead of negation and rejection is something I also find in Kant. Not yet with that same clarity as in my dad, but still it's already there. Because what Kant says is, if you want to abstain from a certain pleasure, maybe because it's bad for yourself, it's unhealthy, it's immoral, maybe because you don't want to become dependent on it, you don't want it to turn into an inclination, whatever the reason. But if you want to abstain from something, then it's hard to only say no to this pleasure, to only say no, I won't do it, I will refrain, right? Like, I will not take this cigarette, or I will not drink this drink. This can be hard. It's easier, Kant says, if you replace it with another pleasure. So if it's not just negative, if it's positive, right? Just like it's hard to simply not think of something, it's easier to think of something else. And if you focus on something else, then that first thought will just be pushed to the back. Likewise, if you make yourself desire something else, if you seek some other form of pleasure, then that first pleasure will maybe be forgotten. Of course, Kant is not the first to realize that. I mean, in the medieval monasteries, they already knew, if you just put a monk alone into a cell and then tell him to not have lustful thoughts, to not masturbate, that maybe won't work. Rather, you need to occupy them. Ore et labore, right? They have to pray and work and labor. Then they will be too occupied to masturbate. But what Kant realizes and what Kant points out is that not only is it helpful to replace one activity, one indulgence with something else, he also points out, actually, this is what we do. This is what we necessarily do. You cannot simply not do something, but rather by not doing something, you are doing something else. So Kant says, if I go, this is his example, if I go into the theater, sure, that might bring me pleasure. I might have fun watching the theater play, but I'm also preventing myself from having other pleasures, other joys. In the time I'm sitting in the theater, I cannot read my book. or I cannot meet up with a friend and have a good conversation with him. And this can be helpful to keep in mind. Because some people are always afraid of missing out in life, but you're always missing out. No matter what you choose, you also choose against 1,000 other things you could do. Right? Like, there are about 4 billion women on the planet. Hypothetically, I could marry any of them. If I choose to be together with one specific woman and to marry her, then I have chosen against all the others, and there's lots of potential pleasure I cannot have anymore. But I now have this pleasure. So, if you just were to tell yourself, okay, I mustn't go to the theater for whatever reason, again, doesn't matter here, then you would maybe feel bad, like you're missing out on some pleasure. But if you remind yourself, hey, I can do something else, I can read my book, I can meet my friend, and if I had gone to the theater, I could not have done these things, then maybe not going to the theater will become easier. So, in life, whenever you want to not do a certain pleasurable thing because it's not prudent, it's not healthy, it's not moral, don't just look at it as you not allowing yourself to do something. Rather, focus on what kind of nice things you can do instead. This again is a important point, I think, in the current climate crisis, because the way it's usually discussed, people feel like things are just being taken away from them, or at least they are threatened to be taken away, and they reject doing anything for the climate, changing their lifestyle at all, because they feel like it will just be a loss. So, for example, here in Germany, they are very hysterical if they think their meat is being taken away. Like the Green Party suggested doing one veggie day in like public cafeterias, right? Not enforced. It's not even that you were being forced to be a vegetarian at home or in a restaurant or whatever. And not the whole week, just one single day. And that alone was enough for them to get slandered and to get basically destroyed by the public and by the press. And people will say, I won't allow them to take away my meat. But the thing is, by eating meat, you're already taking away other things from yourself. Every time you choose to have a dish with meat, you choose against having a vegetarian dish. So you mustn't look at it as just losing something. Losing the meat, you're already losing something. You're always losing something. You're losing 1,000 possibly very tasty vegetarian dishes that you have never tried. Of course, the vegetarian is also losing something. He's losing 1,000 dishes with meat that are also potentially tasty. But life is about choices. And every choice for something is a choice against 1,000 other things. But therefore, also a choice against something can also be a choice for something else. So you can choose not to eat that meat and to try some new vegetarian dish that you have never tried before that maybe you might like. Likewise, here people get very hysterical about potentially having their cars taken away. Again, this is something that no one even tries, including the Green Party. No one in German politics would dare suggest it, because Germany is a very, very conservative and narrow-minded country. Others are far, far ahead of us. I mean, in Paris, they have concrete plans to make the city car-free. In Germany, there are no such plans. In fact, in Berlin, it was just rejected. But still, they will complain about them taking our freedom by taking our cars. But the thing is, our freedom is already being taken by the cars. I mean, what about my freedom to breathe clean air that doesn't make me sick, that doesn't give me lung cancer? What about my freedom to have quiet and peace in the city, to not constantly have this loud noise? What about my freedom to walk on the streets or to sit on the streets with friends? What about children's freedom to play on the streets? I mean, the city could be so much nicer and so much more livable if it was more green and there were more spaces to walk and to socialize with one another. We are losing all that to the cars because the whole city has to be streets and parking lots. So, again, we are always losing something. It's not just if they were to forbid cars, then you have less rights than before. Something is forbidden from you. Well, now it's forbidden to walk on the street. That would then be allowed. So you would lose something, you would gain something. And now you gained something, you gained the cars, you lost something else. And that's how it always is. And if we became more conscious of that, then we could more consciously and more freely and more rationally talk about, well, what would we rather lose and what would we rather gain, instead of just looking at it as, oh, I'm losing something and that's it. There's no positive thing about it. So that's also an important advice of Kant's, I think. Don't just look at what you're losing, at what you're forbidding yourself. Also look at what you can gain from that. But with that, I'm at the end of this lecture. I'm at the end of talking about Kant's Epicureanism. Once again, it should be clear what I already said in my previous lecture, that for our age, Kant's philosophy of happiness is very untimely. Now, with this society that always seeks excitement, that always seeks hedonism, extreme pleasures, excess, this whole teaching of moderation is not what everyone wants to hear. What people are seeking out, as I said in the previous lecture, is a life that is a roller coaster. If you seek these extreme pleasures, there will always be moments of displeasure. Because, again, you make yourself dependent on things. You are happy, you have pleasure if you have these things. But if for some reason you don't get the things that you need, because you need them, you are unhappy. If, on the other hand, they are not a need, they are just a nice bonus, just something pleasant, then when you have them, you are happy. But when you don't have them, you're not unhappy because of it. And so what Kant suggests is not this roller coaster, not going through extremes like that. What he suggests, once more, is the constantly happy heart of the wise person. And he is in agreement with Epicurus that our regular state, so when there's no specific pleasure, when I'm not currently having a good taste in my mouth or not currently experiencing an orgasm or whatever, but I'm also not in pain, that this regular state is not a neutral state, but rather it is already a good, it is already a happy state. I don't need these extra pleasures. Sure, they are nice. And again, Kant is not saying we must never indulge in them at all. He's not advocating for complete asceticism, but he is saying, I don't need them to be happy. I can already be happy in my regular state when I'm not unhappy, when I'm not in pain, when I'm not lacking anything that I truly need. That should be enough for me. Everything else, once more, should be a nice bonus. Now, after having talked about all of this in this lecture and in the previous lectures, in my next lecture, I don't want to talk about a specific aspect of Kant's philosophy of happiness so much, like the affections and passions, like his thoughts on equanimity, like his thoughts on modesty, but rather I want to give a general overview and sort of summary of what precisely is the posture that Kant advocates for. A posture of what he calls practical idealism, a posture of not taking life, except our moral duty in this life, not taking life too seriously, taking life lightly, because this is what leads to this constantly cheerful heart that I've been talking about. My deep thanks be to my supporters: Leo Allmann, Cenk Kubilay Altu, Thomas Doringer, Kim Giamatti, Ellen Hansen, Gernot Klaufen, Benjamin Lehning, Ökobong, Alexander Reuter, Lisa Rinner, Spendierhosenträger, Ron Suhl, as well as to all others who support me and my aufkläring cause.